defined by her Jedi past. She's trying to convince the Martez they don't have to be influenced by how they've had to fight for their own and how they've had to be. It was a great sentiment, a great idea, and it brought up some deep uh, ideas and concepts in here. And probably the deepest and probably most emotional one is when Rafa shares how they lost their parents.
Oh yeah.
And it's something that if you've watched the Clone Wars, you have seen it.
Mm.
Because this goes all the way back to season 3 of Star Wars: The Clone Wars, an episode called "Hunt for Zero," where Zero the Hutt is breaks out of the Republic, is sprung from the Republic prison by none other than Cad Bane, and they basically tear up Coruscant trying to escape, and the Jedi are pursuing him. And there's an accident, and the speeder goes crashing, and it's going to crash into a landing pad full of people, but the Jedi prevent that and steer it into the wall. Well, on the other side of the wall was
Mm.
the Martez home, and the girls weren't there, but their parents were, and that's how their parents were killed. And for something that Ahsoka was directly involved in, she wasn't the one that steered it into that platform. The Jedi they described, of course, sounded more like um,
Well,
Illuminara.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, light green skin is what Rafa said. So I was looking back through some of my DK Star Wars books at all the different Jedi's, and yeah, Luminar and Dooley or Barris Offee,
Mm-hmm.
younger one, but they
No,
didn't say, they don't say.
no, they don't. They don't. You know, how did you feel when you saw this when you heard that story for the first time, David?
Well, this is kind of what I was hinting at in my initial thoughts. You know, when you try to help others, and what if it goes wrong? You have the best intentions, but um, but the people helping, like the Jedi, are not. They have these powers, but they're not godlike. They don't. You know, until it's too late, they don't pick up on that family being behind there. Um, and so, as Rafa was describing this, it's interesting, like you just mentioned a minute ago. Um, I was just tracing back through my head, and I remember those series of episodes with Zero the Hutt, who cracks me up, by the way. Um, but I was like, wait a minute, did I see that ship going down, and so on and so forth? And in the Star Wars .com episode guide for this, it says it's not seen, but you kind of you see it play out a bit, but you don't obviously because it's done later. We don't see the crash killing the parents and stuff like that from season 3, which would have been, let's see, 08, 09, 9, 10, 10, 11. So right around 2010, 2011, you're talking 9 years ago, this show would have aired. But looking at Ahsoka's face as they're describing this is kind of kind of how I feel. Like, now you and I both live in Florida, my friend. When I see everyone forgive me, when I see the pastor in Tampa holding services and putting people at risk, I watch that and I just want to wring the guy's neck. It's like, are you helping us here? Now, this is very different, Aaron, than when I think about you and your parents being overseas and doing missionary work. When I think about that guy, I'm just like, oh my gosh, man, you're making my brain hurt. Why do you do this? And so there's times when things happen, and when Rafa described the response of this Jedi that came and spoke to her and Trace, and the person just says, well, may the Force be with you. Well, or the Force will be with you. I mean, wow, great, fantastic, thanks so much. It really And now I can really see it, looking back on all three of these episodes, that Dave Filoni was really getting us to think very deeply, I think, about a lot of other issues, besides just Star Wars. So you can see I can talk for hours on this subject, but it's so well done, and just the way they animate Ahsoka's face, and I think she ultimately says, "I'm so sorry." Was just gut wrenching.
Oh, it really was, and it's one of those. It's one of those things that we've talked about this in the past on previous shows where they it's just that very deep uh, counter perspective from what's something you see all the time. I mean, you see we've watched all these episodes, and everything has always been from the Jedi point of view, or the clones point of view, and we see it time and time again. And the last arc we saw, and we discussed this at the beginning of this arc,
Yeah.
because it was giving us a perspective of from the people's point of view, not the Jedi, not the clones, but from a civilian's point of view. And I even made the statement: do we even need this? Because we've seen this before. Because the last episodes of season 5, when Ahsoka is being framed, we're getting that perspective of the people, where everybody's not happy with the Jedi, and everybody's got their complaints and frustrations with the Jedi, and we're seeing that. We're seeing those fights. We're seeing those arguments. We're seeing those protests. We saw it then, and I was like, do we really need to see it again? And I made that statement. And this is something that is a complete flip of the coin. This took that, and to me, this story took what they showed us from at the end of season 5, the perspectives we saw at season 5, and took it to the next level.
Well said. Yes.
So I'm officially going to go ahead and say this, and I'm changing my stance on this. Is this something we needed to see? Absolutely.
Well,
This is
go ahead.
absolutely something that we needed. I mean, it's one thing to know there's always going to be a counter. There's always going to be somebody not happy, because as society has proven time and time again, you're not going to make everybody happy. You can sit there and have people say, you know what, I'm going to give everybody in the world $100.
Right.
And half the people will be like, oh, great, yay. And the other half is going to be like, that's it? That's all you're going to give me? I mean, so there's going to be that yin and yang. But there's always going to be that escalation. And I think this took that escalation that we saw at the end of season 5 to a new level. And I think it's something we did need to see, especially going into the transformation of Ahsoka from Jedi to trying to figure out who she is to what we see in Rebels.
Well, right. And something I thought about when you were talking about this, taking it to another level, I think of one of the major overarching themes in Star Wars that you and I have seen, and I've seen it since I was a kid watching the OT, right? The original trilogy, is how much knowledge do people have about Palpatine, right? How much knowledge do people have about the Jedi? And even we see in The Force Awakens, right? Roughly 30 years after the Return of the Jedi, we see Finn, and he meets up with Rey on Jakku, and someone mentions Luke Skywalker, and she says, "Oh, I thought he was a myth." I'm currently, you and I know this. I'm trying to read through the novelization of The Rise of Skywalker. At the same time, I have Resistance Reborn on Audible. And I just didn't get a chance to get through that before seeing The Rise of Skywalker. But in the book, of course, which is after The Last Jedi, you hear a character talking to Leia, asking, is Luke really gone? And people don't know. They don't. Now Leia does. She knows, because she was there, and and met with him and then knows that he's gone. But I don't know. That's always been a confusing part of Star Wars with all the technology and the HoloNet and all this stuff. Compared to the 1920 America or elsewhere, it's always kind of confused me, this lack of information. But also, there's the realities of the Jedi, but then there's Palpatine the whole time stoking a false view of the Jedi as well. And so those are very fascinating subjects to me. And Dan Brooks, he wrote an article. Each episode guide has a 5 highlights of each episode. They did it for Bad Batch episodes. They've done it for these 3 Ahsoka / Martez sisters episodes. And he brings up the description of what you and I are talking about right now, that conversation where Rafa tells Ahsoka that it rocks her to her core. And I thought, yeah, that's what we're seeing. That's taking it to the next level, just like you said.
Oh, definitely. Definitely. It honestly, it rocked me to my core. I can only imagine Sabine, Ahsoka,
Fast.
Carabast. I'm all thrown off because of the Rebels content in this episode. So,
right.
Yeah. Right. So there'll be a lot more Carabast moments, I guarantee you, probably before this episode's over. But the whole story really threw me for a loop in and of itself, because it was it's a very emotional story, and I could see I could tell from the Ahsoka we saw in Rebels to the Ahsoka we saw in the Clone Wars, in the early seasons of the Clone Wars. We knew walking away from the Order at the end of season 5 was going to change her. But going from point A to point B, there's going to have to be a catalyst. I think the Martez sisters are going to be the catalyst to Ahsoka's identity going forward. Mm-hmm. And I think that's why this arc now is, and you can tell I'm changing. I've changed my tune on this arc because of this episode. But this is the catalyst to help Ahsoka identify who she is and who she's going to be now that she's not a part of the Jedi Order. Mm-hmm. And I love it.
Yeah, just like the same series, the Clone Wars, really helped flush out why is Anakin the way he is in episode 3 and more susceptible to falling to the dark side compared to episode 2. Well, the Clone Wars in between 2 and 3 really helps flush that out, and you start to see, oh my gosh, this is why, it's not just 1 or 2 things, but we see a number of things in the Clone Wars that occurs. One is Ahsoka leaving the Jedi Order and seeing how they treated her. But I like how you said this. Now we see, why we see what we see of Ahsoka in Rebels.
Oh, absolutely. I cannot wait to see how they tie this arc up.
Yeah.
Because this is going to be the closing of this arc is going to be pivotal, because they've started something that is going to have long-lasting effects on Ahsoka. And I cannot wait to see them tie this up. So, together again next week.
Yeah.
Which we are going to be together again, but the name of the episode is Together Again. But I'm looking forward to that episode. Smattered in with this deep discussion about who the Martez sisters are and their background, we get another piece of not another piece, but we had another scene that came up, which is something we addressed back on our old show when we covered Star Wars Resistance. We have a character from the show, and we're actually seeing them being tortured. Now, granted, Clone Wars is not Resistance. Resistance was more kid targeted, to be honest. It was more focused at kids, where this, I think,